So yeah, I waited 3 weeks to see this movie after it was released because we had to find a time for the nephews, wanted to get them to see the movie. They finally found a time, saw it 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks after it was released, and so now I get to talk about Finding Dory. So Finding Dory is the sequel to Finding Nemo, a Pixar classic and one of my favorite Pixar movies of all time. I saw this movie 2 weeks ago. I believe it's set a year after the events of Finding Nemo. Dory is living with Nemo and Marlin, still of course suffering from short-term memory loss, but suddenly she sees things triggering memories in her mind as she recalls some of her past and realizes, hey, I have to find my parents. Knowing she has to find them before she forgets everything again, and trying to discover who she was, Dory, Marlin, and Nemo all go on an adventure to find Dory's parents, find out where she came from. Eventually she gets scooped up by some humans and put in a marine wildlife sanctuary, which is where most of the movie takes place. That's as much as I want to go in plot-wise with Finding Dory without giving away too much. I had a blast watching this in movie theaters and really had a fun time. The last time I had this much fun with a Pixar movie was probably WALL-E. Yeah, even though there are 4.5-star worthy movies for me from Pixar after WALL-E, which would be Up, Toy Story 3, Inside Out, The Good Dinosaur, I have to say, for me, Finding Dory actually blew them all out of the water. And maybe you could say, oh, well, maybe it's because you're a big fan of Finding Nemo. And for me, Finding Nemo is either my number one or my second favorite Pixar film. I always battle between that and WALL-E. It's always between them for me. And some days I feel WALL-E's the best, some days I feel Finding Nemo's the best. But because I liked Finding Nemo so much, I was actually worried about Finding Dory. I was worried that it would be too much of a rehash, that it would be too much like the first one and have that sequelitis where it's like everything's the same, just done bigger and better, but less soul and less heart. But instead, I came out of the theater loving it. Alright, what was really great about this film? Okay, I was worried that it would be too much of a rehash, that it would be too much like the same one, just done again. Even though there are some recurring characters, there are some beats that are similar, overall, it feels like a very different film. Yeah, like I said, there are some things that do feel similar. The whole thing about, oh, they have to go and find someone. And that is a big journey across the ocean. Well, at least a little bit of it, because almost all the film is set in this wildlife preserve for marine biology, or that's not exactly what it is. Not sure what to call it. I'm calling it a lot of random different things, I think. I do have to say that the title Finding Dory is a little misleading, because it's not really about finding Dory, it's about finding Dory's parents, finding where Dory came from. So I guess she is finding herself, finding out who she really is on the inside and where she came from and how she was raised. So I guess Finding Dory does work on that internal level, but it doesn't work as the physical level of Finding Dory because, honestly, Marlin and Nemo are sidelined in this film. They are the side characters that are trying to find Dory, but the main meat of the story is Dory as she's trying to find her parents and finding out where she came from. So she is definitely the main protagonist of the film. But as you expect from Pixar, as you'd expect from the people that created Finding Nemo, this is a very beautiful, stunning looking movie. Granted, the short before this film was even more realistic and stunning and absolutely gorgeous. Wow, that short really blew my mind, honestly. But this is a very beautiful Pixar film that's really great to look at. I also found this very cute and actually more funny than the first one. Not to say that Finding Nemo wasn't funny at all, but it wasn't really more of a comedy. It definitely is a fun, family-friendly film that's this big adventure with a lot of danger and some humor. This one had the more comedy and fun vibe, but it still had its depth, it still had its heart, it still had character building, and it still had adventure. And as I would expect from a Pixar film, it did have that emotional punch. It did have that moment where I got teary-eyed and felt, wow, this is deep, this is really emotional, this is a great moment. It had two of that in this film around the same point of the film. I loved how the movie began as well, as it shows Dory as a young fish with her parents still, and leads up to the point where she met Marlin for the first time. So it skips a few as she grows up and meets Marlin, then jump one year later, and that's when the movie starts. Gotta say, Dory was pretty cute as a fish. Those huge frickin' eyes, they were adorable. I loved almost all the characters and really liked the voice acting that came with all those characters. Dory shows that she can play a main protagonist even with her short-term memory loss and still be convincing, still be a person that you can get involved with and care about and really feel like a great main protagonist. Even though there isn't as much of Marlin and Nemo as there is in the first one, they still do good as well, and they are still characters I care about. Almost all the rest of the cast are newcomers, and I really liked a lot of them. The octopus Hank is played by Ed O'Neill, and he was one of my favorite new characters of the entire film. Probably my second favorite character of the entire film, right behind Dory. Probably mainly because he has his own character arc along with Dory, because he's this guy this octopus that's trying to escape and doesn't let anyone in, doesn't let any friendship or anyone bond with him, and he has a little character arc because he's sort of just using her at first to get her tag and try to escape the facility. And you have that whole storyline, eventually they're going to bond, eventually they're going to become friends, and it's a natural progression. I definitely like the whale shark Destiny, but then again, that's probably one of those animals out there that I'm a sucker for. I like whale sharks. It's a very different role for her because the only other thing that I know her from mostly is It's Sunny in Philadelphia, or It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. She's Dee in that series. Very different role for her. Oh, and the two sea lions in this film, probably one of my favorite side characters of Finding Dory. Mainly because one of them is Idris Elba. But they were funny. They were freaking funny. And a very surprising voice guest in this film by Sigourney Weaver, who plays herself. I could not stop laughing as soon as Sigourney Weaver showed up in this film. Well, her voice did. And there was definitely a theme in this movie about disadvantages, about disabilities, overcoming them, understanding them, how other people act around them. Which makes sense because they are in a marine biology institution that helps marine wildlife and then brings them back into the wild once they're better and healed. So it definitely makes sense. So it definitely makes sense for that theme to be here, especially with Dory suffering from her own short-term memory loss and finding ways to deal with it and cope with it. Overall, this is a really fun film, very funny, very heartfelt, emotional. It's a Pixar classic in my book. There's only a few little things about Finding Dory I didn't like as much. One of them being one of the side characters, the beluga whale. I wasn't a big fan of him. I like the voice actor who plays him, Ty Burrell, which I really didn't realize it was him voicing it until I later looked it up. I mean, there are definitely funny moments with him, Destiny, and Dory. I just wasn't a big fan of the character overall. And even though this movie does build to a crazy climax, it just keeps building and building and building to the point where it gets too over the top and too unbelievable. Then again, we're talking about an animated film, a Pixar film about talking fish. Well, they don't really talk to humans, they talk to each other, but it's talking fish. So it does feel a little weird to say that this film could get too over the top, but for me, I feel the climax does get so over the top, it gets a little too ridiculous and far-fetched, even though still fun and entertaining. Really fun, really good Pixar classic, one of my favorites now. I don't think I'd put it in my top 5, mainly because I think my top 5 are all 5-star movies. And I'm giving Finding Dory 4.5 stars. It's probably more like 4.75, or if you want to go into real detail about it, because unfortunately I only do halves and wholes, but it is closer to 5 stars than 4.5. Probably just right under Zootopia for me. So, have you seen Finding Dory? What'd you think about it? Go ahead and comment below. If not, what is your favorite Pixar film of all time? Mine, like I said, I battle between it every day. It's between WALL-E and Finding Nemo. And if you like this video and want to see more, please subscribe and check out my movie reviews of 2015 and 2016. As always, this is Bruce Gifford, and this was Just My Opinion.